Hello, everyone. Welcome to this training on giving effective feedback and feedback through Workday. Our presenter today is Garrett Cleaver, who is one of ODE's HR business partners. If you have any questions at any time during this training, please put them in the questions box and we will address them at the end. Also, you can put the responses to the questions Garrett will ask you in the discussion box. And now I will turn it over to Garrett.
All right, thanks, Josie. Again, my name is Garrett Cleaver out of ODE Human Resources. And today we're going to discuss feedback and feedback in Workday. In particular, we're going to discuss a strengths-based approach to feedback. This is a way to structure feedback in a way that gets at our intended result. And if you have any questions after this presentation, afterward you'll receive a link not only to a recording of the presentation, but my contact information and additional resources, including the slides. So what we're talking about today in terms of feedback, just a simple definition here, is helpful information or criticism that is given to someone to say what can be done to improve a performance. That improvement of performance is our ultimate goal. That's why we're giving this information. That's probably why we receive that information, whether as an employee, a friend, a coworker, maybe an athlete, from a coach. It was all about improving performance. But in terms of ODE and our work life and our workplace here, why is feedback important? Why do we do it? Why do we give it to our coworkers? Why do supervisors give it to us? Just go ahead and type in the chat box, give you a moment. Why is feedback important to you? And some of this might come right from the definition. You know, to me personally, feedback is important because I want to improve. I want to know what I'm doing well, and I want to do that even better. And it helps me address some uncertainty. Maybe I did a work product I thought was really good. Do I really know what was good about it, how that was received, and do I know what I can do better next time? That's why I want feedback. And critically to the workplace, I think feedback is really a component of effective leadership. And we can all be leaders. This isn't just about a supervisor giving feedback to an employee or somebody else in a position of power giving feedback to somebody below them. It's about what we can all do as leaders to affect our well-being, our self-concepts, and productivity. Again, what are we doing well? How do we do that even better? And I mentioned uncertainty. Effective feedback decreases uncertainty. Again, you know what's going on. You know how what you're doing is received. You know what that means for your role. What does it mean to do well? When we know what to do well, we have that goal set in front of us that improves motivation. And feedback is really essential to a performance review. If you're a supervisor on this webinar, this feedback is critical. And when we do that webinar on performance appraisals, really taking that feedback that you're giving to employees is important. And it's also important as employees ourselves. What kind of feedback are we getting? Because that's going to help improve our strengths. And I think it's also going to address this idea of the yearly performance appraisal, which can sometimes be kind of a bear or perceived as a chore. It comes around once a year. You might think, okay, well, what did I do in the last year? What does my supervisor know that I did in the last year? Really having effective feedback throughout the year can actually really make that performance review a much easier process. But it's possible that feedback is detrimental to performance. So I want to give you all time to think about a negative experience you had when receiving feedback. And take a moment and just describe in the chat box, what was the impact for you? How did that feedback make you feel? You don't necessarily need to type in what exactly the feedback was or who was giving it, but really, what was the impact for you? Did you experience anger during that negative experience? Were you sad? Were you defensive? Did it actually make you feel unmotivated? What was that experience for you? Just take a moment and go ahead and type that into the chat box. So intuitively, we might notice that experiencing negative feedback can make you feel disconnected, insignificant, or like I said before, maybe angry or defensive. And that's actually not the ultimate goal, right, of feedback. And this plays out in the research. In one review of over 130 studies, feedback actually decreased performance 1/3 of the time. Now, I want to reiterate this point again because it is so important. That means over 1/3 of performance feedback that was ultimately, we hope, designed with the intent to actually improve performance, actually had the opposite result. So I encourage you to think for yourself, is 1/3 of your feedback actually having the unintended consequence of what you want? How are we delivering feedback to each other? In what way are we doing it? As I'll talk about in a moment, the strengths-based approach really starts with the end in mind. Why are we delivering this feedback? And I would say ultimately we probably don't want, and most people don't want to actually create feelings of insignificance, disconnection, anger, or defensiveness. And they actually want to see people improve and utilize their strengths. The strengths-based approach will provide some structure to help us do that. So if feedback might have that consequence of actually decreasing performance or creating those negative feelings, what might make it effective? What's that structure? And that's what we're calling the strengths-based approach here. To contrast what that is, I think it's helpful to talk about the weakness-based approach. I think this is typically the easy way of providing feedback. It's when somebody explains everything somebody did wrong and what they need to do to prevent the same mistakes happening again. And it asks for improvement based on overcoming weaknesses. Now, this is not necessarily a bad thing. There are cases and instances where this approach is helpful. You can imagine somebody who's new to a task or new to a job, and they simply don't have the knowledge. They need to know, okay, what is the incorrect way? What is the wrong way look like, so they can avoid it in the future? But that's about addressing a knowledge-based problem, giving information. And this can be helpful when somebody's asking for it. When they come to you and say, hey, what is it I need to stop doing? Or, hey, I just did a presentation. Did I say a lot? Did I say and a lot? What can I work on and stop doing to overcome a weakness or correct something I did wrong? And in that case, they're asking for it. They want that information. And once somebody asks for it, we can, of course, give it to them. But we can still give it to them in a strengths-based approach. One of the problems with the weakness-based approach is it kind of leads us to providing feedback based on somebody's personality or talents. And it's a deficit-based approach. If someone receives feedback that they have a bad attitude or need to be more positive, they don't necessarily have the information to do anything with that. And that's probably just going to make them defensive, angry, sad, among other negative feelings. In contrast, the strengths-based approach, like it says, is about identifying employee strengths. This encourages people to improve. It's about how they succeed. And it's asking people to maintain or improve their behavior based on continued or heightened use of their strengths. And this approach primes us or leads us to link feedback to knowledge and skills rather than talents. It's what we did well and how we can improve. And I'll show some examples of that here in a second. But it's important also in any feedback conversation to choose an appropriate setting. And we'll talk about how Workday might feed into that setting. But is this one-on-one? Is it verbal feedback? Is it written? Is it in an email? Is it over a telephone call? Is it in person? The setting's critical. And the feedback needs to be specific and accurate. Again, it needs to tie to knowledge and skills rather than talents. And follow-up is an important component of strengths-based feedback. Not only Are you giving the feedback, asking somebody to improve upon something? But then maybe at that next opportunity, you can connect that feedback to what they did and see where they improved. Again, all with the aim of getting the person to improve based on their strengths. And this plays out in research as well, which has shown that feedback focused on the strengths-based approach actually leads to greater performance improvements rather than focusing on somebody's deficits or weaknesses. So let's take a look at a couple examples. In this case, maybe somebody receives this feedback. Hey, great presentation this morning. Would this be an example of effective feedback? And go ahead and respond in the question box. And ultimately what this is a compliment, right? This might make somebody feel good, and if that's your goal, great. But if your goal was to have somebody improve on that presentation, this isn't really giving them any information. It's definitely not a weakness-based approach to feedback, but it isn't strengths-based as well. They don't have the information they need to improve. What about you need to become a better public speaker? Is this an example of effective feedback? And again, this is definitely an example of the weakness-based approach. This is about talent, somebody's talent or skill as a public speaker. They don't have the information. They need to focus on that next presentation and do it even better. And ultimately, this comes down to talent, and somebody might even interpret this as character and lead to some of those feelings that you noted before. Again, probably the opposite of what we're trying to achieve here. What about this piece of feedback? Your presentation was very informative. I look forward to the next one, especially if you speak a little louder so I can hear you better. Would that be an example of an effective feedback? All right, we have some specific information here. There's a strengths-based approach. It's about the information in the presentation, which somebody can improve upon. Now they asked this person to do something a little bit different, speak a little louder. Now that might be seen as a weakness-based approach, but in this piece of feedback, they're tying it to the information. We could actually get more information, even more information from your presentation if you spoke a bit louder. And so they can take that, work on that, and again, it's tied to that piece that was powerful or strengths-based about the presentation and do even better next time. So now I want to take a deeper dive and look at a hypothetical made-up example here. You might relate, I certainly relate as someone who came up working in retail positions in past jobs. But in this case, we have an example where Jack, a manager, has a conversation with his employee, Jill. Again, in this situation, it's a supervisor talking to an employee, but this approach to feedback can be used in any situation where we're trying to give information to another person to help them improve. But in this case, Jack wanted to take some time to compliment Jill on some things that were going well. But Jack did have another goal in place, wanted to help Jill become even better. And so he's leading off with that and actually phrases this as an invitation. Hey, here's what I want to do. How does that sound? And in this case, Jack issues another invitation. Are there any areas you feel like you stand out? This can be a great coaching approach if you're in a position to give somebody feedback. Say, hey, what do you think you are doing well? And in this case, Jill identifies some things about respecting the time of customers and moving quickly. And you might read in that one of her goals as she works is efficiency. And Jack responds, hey, I've noticed this. I've noticed this skill. You work through lines, you get customers through quickly, very efficient. And hey, let's tie this into quality of interactions. Again, it's an invitation. As a manager, Jack's probably really caring about, hey, when his customers come into the store, what are they experiencing with his employees? And it gets an invitation for Jill to be even better or identify some ways to improve. And she thinks, well, maybe I could be more friendly. I just thought customers cared about getting on their way, in that efficiency piece. And then Jack responds that he values efficiency, right? He actually cares about that. He probably wants customers to get out of the store with their stuff and make those sales and get out on time. But he also wants her to consider the quality of the time customers spend with his employees and why that might be important. And hey, can we strike this balance between efficiency and quality? And is there actually a connection between the two? And so in this case, Jill might say, okay, maybe there is something I can do, especially if there wasn't a long line. So hey, I'm being efficient. Maybe there's some other things I can do while I'm accomplishing that efficiency. And I can find a balance between those two things. And so overall, what Jack as a manager did here in this scenario is he opened it up as an invitation. Doesn't have to necessarily be structured that way for every feedback approach, but it's a way to get that person to think about what are their strengths, what are they doing well. And maybe somebody just hasn't had the time to do that, actually sit down and think about what they've done well before. And that can be an important space to create for somebody. And at the same time, Jack as a manager wanted to value and recognize the efficiency that Jill was accomplishing. But hey, maybe there's some other way or another way that can be improved upon. Okay, this efficiency is really leading to some time and space, and maybe Jill can fill in with connecting more with customers. And the only reason she can do that is because she is so efficient. So even though Jack is asking her to improve upon some aspect of her knowledge and skill, again, not her talent or character as an employee or as maybe a customer service specialist in this case, it's about the skill and knowledge she brought to being so efficient, creating that opportunity to create the connection with the customer. And then at the end, he's going to offer a follow-up. Hey, let's talk again in a week or so, see how it's going. You're trying something new. You're trying to improve upon something. Again, that follow-up piece is key. Is it actually happening? So there's that other opportunity for an additional feedback conversation. And overall, put yourself in the position of an employee like this, receiving this type of feedback from a manager. Would you be receptive to that type of feedback, to that type of approach? How would that make you, or in this case, our hypothetical Jill, feel about the feedback? Yeah, definitely some feelings of being valued. I like ownership, right? That's that invitation here. She's identifying what she can do better, and it's not only valuing knowledge and skills. That person's going to come away with some positive feeling. I talked about the importance of setting in connection with this idea of feedback and strengths-based approach. We do have an additional setting to do that with our new Workday HR system. So I'm going to take a moment and step through how we actually do that and run through another strengths-based approach example. A couple notes on Workday. However, it does not replace an in-person feedback conversation. This comes back to that end in mind. What's the appropriate setting for feedback? And is this going to be the best way to do it? Nice thing about Workday, it's a great place to document feedback. So again, if you did something, a project or a presentation or a report, whatever it was, maybe you got some feedback on it. Hey, in Workday, you can pull it up a year later and actually see what happened. And Workday does offer an easy and quick outlet to give feedback when you otherwise would not. Maybe you're already in Workday in the system. You don't need to pull up an email. You don't need to do something separate. It's right there in Workday, and you can send that quick, easy feedback. So I'm going to move over to Workday. And log in. In Workday, if you've been playing around in there at all over the last few weeks, you'll probably know there's a few different ways to get to the same result. One way we can get to feedback is we can simply do a search. For feedback, and we get a couple different options. We can request feedback from others. We can get feedback on ourselves, and we can give feedback. So if you like to search, that's one way to do it. But feedback is also through an application we should all have on our homepage called Talent. And Talent does give a few options, but the one we want is an action on the right-hand side. And that's give feedback. And it's a fairly straightforward process. I just need to find the person I want to give feedback on. Hit OK. And I have a simple text box I can enter some feedback and an option. I can share this with others, which means it'll show up on Josie's profile, and I'll show you in a minute what that looks like. Or I can not share it with Josie. If I choose don't share, Josie won't see that, but that will go to her manager and the HR business partner supporting that work unit. But we just talked about the strengths-based approach. Obviously, I want to give somebody that feedback. I want them to know that information. I don't want it to be anonymous in case they want to follow up with me later. So I can check the box share with others. So that means Josie's going to get the notification and it'll show up on her profile. And in the strengths-based approach, I might give feedback such as, great job on the report, which is itself, like we talked about, a compliment, but I want to target those strengths. Say, hey, I appreciated the research you put into the report. I could tell it was clearly researched. And not only that, the writing was clear and succinct. And I can offer a suggestion on another piece. Hey, again, using that research that you can clearly do and the clear and succinct writing, maybe some more information on another piece. Workday does allow a badge, and these are just kind of fun ways to recognize somebody. And for this one, I might put educational. Then I hit submit, and I get the green check mark letting me know that the information was submitted correctly. And if I wanted to see what that looked like on somebody's profile, I can go back up to the search box, type in their name, find the person, click on the name, and if I scroll down, on the very bottom of all of our profiles is a feedback section where that public feedback is housed. And even here under the feedback section is another way I can actually get to that feedback screen. But that's how it would show up on somebody else's profile if you were to give them feedback. The type of feedback that is appropriate is some brief constructive advice. You can tell I only spent maybe a minute or 2 minutes on that piece of feedback. There isn't that opportunity for one-on-one conversation, that back and forth, that invitation that we looked through in the scenario. I can give praise or compliments on work, and that's fine too. Again, if my goal is to simply to build somebody up and give them a compliment, I can certainly do that. But it's not going to be the strengths-based approach. My goal wouldn't be to see additional improvement somewhere else. So now on to your homework assignment. Go ahead and try giving a colleague performance feedback through Workday after this webinar. And remember these steps. Recall the purpose of feedback. What feedback are you giving? What are you trying to do? Use the strengths-based approach. What do you want to see them improve or continue doing? what specific knowledge, skills, and behavior did you see that you appreciated and saw led to whatever successful outcome? And keep it brief. Workday does not replace an in-person conversation. So think to yourself as you're doing this feedback in Workday, is this appropriate, this written feedback, or should I actually have a conversation with the person? So we've covered the strengths-based approach to feedback. Again, it's about the knowledge, skills, and behavior, ways somebody can actually improve and utilize their strengths. It's not about the weakness or deficit-based approach and overcoming those weaknesses. It's about targeting where people can improve and do better next time. Again, the setting is critical. Where and how are you giving this feedback? And connecting with the end in mind, what is the purpose for the feedback you're giving? And then we walk through how to do that in Workday.
Okay, so if you guys want to look into feedback further, here's some great resources for you guys to look at. A lot of these are accessible on Google Scholar or any other scholarly websites like that. So thank you for attending this training and have a great rest of your day.